Mezzanine is sort of specifically calling it a toolkit because it's a sort of an amalgamation of a couple different layers on the open source architecture, right? So how does all that work? What are the different constituents and how do they work together to provide this solution?
Yeah, so the reason why we call it a toolkit is because there are too many engineers in the business and there are not enough clinicians. I'm just teasing, but it's a nice description, isn't it? But it is a kit. It's like a box that's got these different layers and capabilities and whatever that, came from purpose design solutions and where we've taken almost the best components from other solutions that we've had in our armory or our portfolio for many years, even things from outside healthcare. So it is very much a toolkit. And it does, at its heart, as I said earlier, it's about the intelligent balancing of the supply side to the demand side. And the first point, let me start with the beneficiaries. In other words, another word for a patient. I just don't like calling them patients because they're not sick. They just need a vaccine.
Exactly.
So that bit is you need to identify who these beneficiaries are. And then you need to be able to attest or validate or verify who they are. Not everyone is a doctor. It's interesting. A lot of people have tried to jimmy the system in this country, and they'll continue to do it because that's what humans do. But once we've been able to validate that individual. And
when you say validate, that means sort of tying them to some sort of digital signature and identity.
Well, yes. Well, right. Certainly in this case, if you claim that you are a medical professional or a paramedical professional, your name and number, as it were, exists on some database, professional database. And so this is my earlier point about interoperability. If you then link your system to that system, you're then able, or a third-party system, you're then able to effectively ping in real time and validate, who that individual is, who they say they are. If you, for instance, go to Pick and Pay and you want to open a bank account with I think it's time, that takes, 3 or 4 minutes before the machine will issue a card. All that validation is going on in the background in real time with various departments and whatever it is, maybe tax authorities and all the rest, just to attest to who you are and so forth. So the important point is once you've done that, so you've now moved to almost the second point, you then need to align it to where that individual fits within a country's prioritization plan in terms of the vaccine rollout. Recall that no country, of course, unless you live with Justin Trudeau, then you're extremely lucky. But let's not get into that discussion, okay? I'll get really upset, and I don't want to do that. But you need to understand where individuals now fit in terms of that prioritization. So healthcare workers in this country and most countries around the world are in the first cohort, then followed by potentially essential workers, then followed by people with comorbidities, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Then the rest of us, sadly. And you'd think, despite my age and so forth, that I'd be in cohort 2, but nothing could be further from the truth. So once you've done that, then you need to link that individual to a very specific point where vaccines will be made available or are available. So you have the identity, it's been validated, and you have a service point. Great, let's put that aside for a sec. Now, the other part of the toolbox is the stock visibility and the stock management component. So that sits at the level of every single vaccine service point or facility where vaccines will be provided. And that provides you with real-time visibility over the levels of the stock that are required to provide you with the vaccine. So it's not just the vaccine.
The inventory, in other words, right?
Exactly, yeah. And here's an interesting thing. There was a guy from DHL, I think he was the CEO for Africa, the MD for Africa, at a talk or presentation recently. He said that for every pallet of vaccines, there are 50 pallets of commodities that are required. Can you believe that? That's incredible.
Wow.
No wonder, organizations like DHL and others are required to do this because it's just so complex.
And when you say commodities, those are the additional sort of supplies that need to be kind of administered alongside the actual dosage as
Needles,
well, right?
swabs,
Okay.
PPE, there may be other things as well, and so forth. But so once you've got a view of the levels of the stock and so forth, and here comes the really cool part, and you link that now to those validated beneficiaries, and you've aggregated demand to that specific point, you now know how many people want vaccines at this specific point and how much is available. And you can say,
it's no longer guesswork.
Okay, exactly, it's gone. And now if you have a control tower sort of view where all this data is aggregated and you have an advisory capability, that's suitably enabled to make decisions, quickly and so forth, rather than defaulting through, traditional decision-making mechanisms which take too long, you can now replenish that stock down that specific arm to those specific facilities and so forth. So once you've got that right, and crucially, you also need to know what vaccines are coming into the country. So when is the next batch coming? Because clearly, if you don't have stock coming in, then there's no point in now lining up people to go and get immunized at vaccine service points. So you need that information, and then you need to also understand the throughput. How many people can be vaccinated per facility per day? And that depends on a number of things, not least the number of people that can vaccinate or register to provide vaccinations, but a number of different things. And once you've rolled all of that together, then the ministry, as effectively the owner of the solution, can now press the big green button and start effectively sending people to get vaccinated. And the way that that's achieved is we've linked that into our vouchering capability. So voucher is nothing...
Which is the other component in the toolkit.
Yeah. So the voucher is nothing more complex than an alphanumeric code that a 5-year-old can read. And it sits in an SMS, and that is the mechanism of the currency of exchange. That is the value that we're sending to somebody who only owns a feature phone. You don't need to go and buy expensive kit, have access to data and all the rest of it. We're using, basic communication channels to affect this, which is super important. And we also do that on a network agnostic basis. So we're not just limited because we're a Vodacom company to providing these services to only where Vodacom has a GSM license. We do it across the board, using aggregators and so forth, which is very important. And once that patient receives the voucher, they then will, which tells you, the facility you have to go to, the date you have to go to, and potentially even the time and so forth. That depends on a number of things. Then they will get there and they will be validated into the system in real time. They'll receive the vaccine. And if it's, say, the first out of 2 doses, then the moment that dose has been given to you, it is then captured into the system. So it updates your digital record. And the system is automated to then send you a new voucher for 6 weeks hence or 2 months hence.
The next one.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a form of reminder and so forth. So conceivably, we've got the capability to build additional intelligence into it and demand, messaging, compliance management, and so forth into it as well. And then upon completion of that particular vaccine regimen, whether it's one like a J&J or 2 like a AstraZeneca and others, or most others, the system can generate an electronic PIN, which is just a way of saying you've had the vaccines and well done. But we won't, as a company, print those out and in effect give them to people in their hands and so forth. But it is available if people require it.